Welcome. Welcome to our IMS Facebook Live event today. So we're here at the International Montessori School at the Aldrich Bay campus. My name is Matthew Snade. I'm the Director of Pre-Elementary Programs here at IMS, and I'm here with Jen Yu.
Hi, I'm Jen. I'm a Montessori 3 to 6 trained guide. I was a teacher and curriculum leader here at IMS for 7 years, and now I wear my IMS parent hat. My son Benji is 2.5 and in the IMS Foundation program.
So many of you may have joined us for our first Facebook Live event, which we held at the end of March, and during that time we covered a number of sort of broader topics about how to support toddlers and preschoolers during this time. We call it our Surviving and Thriving series, as we all sort of cope with social distancing, more time at home, and what that means for us as parents and for our toddlers. Today we are going to cover sort of target in on some of the biggest challenges that any parent faces. Certainly they sort of really impact us during this period of time, and that's specifically to do with bedtime. We're going to talk about mealtime routines, and we're going to talk about toilet learning as well for those of you that are in that stage or at some point hope to be getting to that stage, and give you some perspective on that. This is the second sort of in our Surviving and Thriving series. We're going to keep this up on March 14th. We'll have another event for you when we'll focus on language and emotional development particularly. So do join us for that. We'll send out some information prior to that event for May 14th. If you missed the first session and would like to hear about that, then go to our Facebook, IMS Facebook page, and you'll be able to replay the video and see what we had to say in our first session. And again, this is a Facebook Live event. We will be taking parent questions. So we'll sort of get to those towards the end. Our session will be about 30-40 minutes, and we'll go ahead and answer questions towards the end. So let's dive right in. We're going to start with the bedtime sort of topic. Okay. I'm sure you can all hear me there. So let's start with that. How do we maintain a bedtime routine?
Bedtime routines. Routines are important. They help young children predict and anticipate what's going to happen next, and it can really reduce the struggles that you often have with a toddler, power struggles, and because it's not a negotiable, you just follow your routine. So as soon as possible, decide as a family what the steps are for your bedroom routine. For most families, that's going to look like a family meal, toileting or diaper change, getting into the bath, having maybe a milk feed or a bedtime snack, story, brush the teeth, say goodnight, cuddle, have a lullaby, turn out the lights, and goodbye. It doesn't really matter what's in that routine. You decide as a family what works for you, and every child will be different, but stick to it. Right. And even within that routine, you can allow for flexibility for the child to choose, which is really important with toddlers. Lots of either or choices. Do you want the fire engine pajamas or the police car pajamas? Do you want cereal or do you want a banana?
Not so much choices about the sequence of the routine. Sequence of the routine stays fixed, but choices about within each step that there's some optionality there for them.
That's right. So, after a mealtime, the child immediately comes down from the high chair and goes into the bathroom because they know it's time for bath. They come out of the bath and they go into the cuddling area for a story, and they go and choose their stories. Those are choices that they can make and help them feel empowered within the structure. We actually have a term for that. It's called freedom within limits in Montessori.
Yeah, and we'll sort of be touching base on this, I think, quite a bit as we go through, but which is this concept that children naturally are looking for guidance. They're trying to test limits. They're trying to find out what they can and can't do, how that sort of goes. So as a parent, you're trying to sort of present this consistency for them, this just sort of implied expectation that okay, this is the way we do things. This is a particular time of day, the particular event that we're going through, and then so there isn't that room for that questioning or that wonder.
The structure is actually good for them. They thrive on that. Yeah. Toddlers actually crave that predictability, and it helps them to have something they can rely on, that they don't have to guess what is the next step, what is the next activity we're going to.
Yeah, and for yourselves, you really want to build up your own sort of conviction and confidence in what your routine is, especially if there's going to be multiple adults involved, that you've sort of pre-worked that out. What is our routine? What do we, and why do we do it that way? And so it's good, it's solid, it's set. You're not questioning yourself of, can I do this, can I do that? Then the child just reads that and it becomes much more comfortable. They're much more likely to fall into it if you're in that setting.
Definitely if you have multiple caregivers taking over bedtime, you want to agree on that beforehand. I've actually found that it can be helpful if you have pictures on the wall to help the adults and the child, and that way you know exactly what the steps are.
And you might verbalize the sequence as well, sort of, have that oral repetition.
Like a story.
Yeah, it's a little bit, different children will sort of twig to different ways of repeating patterns, but you can do it with that visual guide, with an oral sort of. You can even sing-song it a bit if you want to get really creative with it.
It's really helpful for any time sleep falls out of your expectations. If you're traveling, if you have visitors in the home.
It's something you can hold on to. It's a piece of consistency that you can
it
keep.
always helps us when we come back, whether it's been traveling or teething or a wonder week. There's always something with sleep. It is up and down for the first few years.
Okay, and how about helping a child actually fall asleep? So you have the routine, you've set them down, and whatever setup you have for the sleeping. And
sleep is complicated, and no two children sleep alike. But I think we can all fall back on helping the child become as independent as possible in their own routine and follow their physical cues of tiredness by not becoming an obstacle. So often when a child becomes dependent on an external factor like a pacifier or nursing to sleep or rocking, it's because we've become the obstacle and put that in there. And often it's unintentional. We call it accidental parenting, but it can be hard to wean a child off that habit. Whereas if we start from a very early age, we can help to empower them to become independent.
Yeah, there's quite a bit about planning there.
Yes.
Having a sort of plan and making those decisions ahead of time, because when you're in the moment, it can be a real struggle, and you're going to tend to just sort of reach for whatever comes to mind, and so pre-planning sort of
as
ahead
much
of
as
time.
possible. I think if you're watching and you're expecting a new baby, my number one advice would be make a plan for sleep. Not many parents know about a sleep approach that they're going to take. We all know we're not going to be doing a lot of sleeping for a long time, but what exactly to do and what are the steps you want to take as a family, that's really important. You want to have that consistency with your partner so that you're not arguing about it at 2 o'clock in the morning with a screaming infant.
Yeah. And what about when to start setting that routine? So you're talking about planning ahead of time. Now, some of you may be well beyond that stage, but for those that are still at the early stages?
It's never too late to start. You can start as soon as the newborn comes out of that sleepy 4th trimester, I would say somewhere between 2.5, 3 months. You can start a simple routine there. In between feeds, you can do eating activity and then sleeping, and then just repeat that pattern. With the bedtime routine, you can do a mini version of it before any nap. So a shorter version, but similar steps.
Right. Yeah, and if you happen to be, if you're in a situation where your child is older and you're not really happy with, or you don't think it's really going well in terms of the routine that you have, you want to make a change, you want to try something different. And the same follows when we start talking about mealtime. Then you can just talk it through with your partner, build up what that's going to be, and then just start implementing it. It will take a bit longer.
Yes.
To build to go away from something that a child is used to will take a bit longer, but you can build that in with consistency, with that patience and persistence. You'll get there to adopting a new routine if that's what's called for, if that's what you want to.
Whatever you choose, stick to it for at least 2 weeks, because it's going to take 2 weeks just for you and your partner to get on a similar footing with what's expected, what type of language you're going to use. And we'll talk about that next time as well, how much language can impact a child's behavior.
As always, patience with yourself, patience with your child.
So much.
That's the best protocol there. Now, you've put your child down, you have this wonderful routine, you've set your child down, you've done all of that, but they're still calling out for you. So if it's a younger child, maybe it's tears, it's crying. If they're a little bit older, maybe they're verbally calling out, or maybe they're coming out of bed to you. So what's the approach there with the child in that situation?
So you want to try to maintain the child's sleeping place as much as possible. So if you put your child to bed in their bed, or whether it's a crib or a floor bed, or maybe you're co-sleeping in the same room, whatever it is, take them back to that space, because you want them to know and you want to assert that that is a safe place for them to sleep, and that is where you expect them to sleep. You can use some of the language that you used when you put them to sleep. So in my family, it's time to rest now. I will see you in the morning. I love you. It's short and simple, but we use the same 3 sentences over and over. And whether it's one time, some nights it's 9, some nights it's 15, you turn them around and do that. So physically and gently, but firmly and confidently.
Yeah, the confidence part is really important there. From our years respectively in the classroom, and certainly, when it comes to parenting as well, it is very much about what the children read of your actual confidence level. What they sense in you, what your level of conviction is about. It's right for you to be sleeping in your own bed if that's what it is, or whatever you've set up, whatever you've chosen, that is the right place, that is the safe place.
Yes.
So in the middle of the night, you don't actually need to come and sleep with us or change the routine in whatever way. That is, and both parents need to be on the same page, and that you're feeling confident that way.
I can't stress how important that is.
Yeah.
Because if you have one parent who's perhaps a little uncomfortable with the crying, with the noise, or even just has to get up in the morning to work, it can be difficult if you're struggling as adults to get on the same page.
Yeah, and in reality, for your child, even if you're struggling with your partner or deciding which is right, pick one.
Yes, it doesn't matter.
Pick one. It's going to be better for your child, even if you're still hesitant. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Pick it, stick with it, go with it. That's going to be better for your child than still having it up in the air. What should be done here? Okay, and so they finally do get to sleep, and you've established that. So how much sleep is enough sleep? So in terms of when you might want to start a child going to bed, how long they should be sleeping?
So I like to look at awake times. The recommendations range, and you have to follow your own child, because your child may be a high sleep need child, or in my case, low sleep needs. But you watch to see within this amount of awake time. In the mornings, how are they doing? In the afternoons, when the energy is low for everyone, how are they doing? And for every child, that will vary. I think it's still ideal, though, to keep a bedtime for any child who's 3 months to 6 years old. Right. A bedtime between 6 and 8 p.m. is still ideal for their most rested state. Right.
Yeah, I think it certainly does vary some child to child. There's some talk about people having different clocks, different biological clocks about what they're used to. In terms of the activity level of your family might be very different, morning to evening, from family to family. But generally speaking, I think if you're getting your child a pretty nice early start to the rest period, that 6 to 8 o'clock at night, if possible, and then that they're able to sleep through then. And then as you're sort of going on and going through, when you're struggling at other times in the day, do look at what's happening with sleep. That certainly can be one of the factors, or maybe the factor that's making mid-afternoon really hard, or that's making something else really challenging. So don't forget about the sleep times.
Yes, an overtired baby or an overtired toddler is the worst thing for behavior. And
overtired parents too.
Overtired parents as well.
Same issue.
What you want to make sure is that your child is in bed before they become overtired. Right. I think that was a new phenomenon for me as a mom. That
once you've reached that state,
it's stressful. It's not that let's just make them stay up until they're tired. It doesn't work that way with young children. They have to go to bed before they're in that state of hyperarousal, when the cortisol is up. It's like when you party all night and then you can't calm down to sleep.
You can't settle down. And stay away from the coffee before. before bed. So one last sort of sleep topic that I'd like to talk about is the actual physical setting. If you've read any Montessori literature, Dr. Montanero's book, or what have you, then you will have heard about the floor bed, and I think that's a little bit more popular now as well.
Yes.
So we do have a picture of the floor bed set up. So we're going to
swap to the screen.
show that to you on the screen, so you can see what that looks like. And then Jen, if you can just walk us through that a little bit.
Yep. So a floor bed is a mattress. It can be a crib size or a twin size mattress of a room that is completely safe. That's really important to remember. Whether your child is sleeping in their own room or sharing a room with you, which is very common, you want to make sure that the room is completely safe. That means getting down on your hands and knees and exploring the space from their height. If they're just tiny, tiny infants, then crawling and looking at it from their perspective. Is the furniture securely attached to the walls? Are there small objects that they might mouth? Can they access cords that you need to remove? So if you're sharing a room, I shared a room with my child for the first 7 months, and that meant that I had to remove a lot of the furniture in my room. It's a fairly sparse room.
Right. And so one of the sort of main elements or arguments for why would you have a floor bed? Why are they not in a crib? Why are they, what have you? It's about the freedom of movement. It's about the independence and about the choice. So, your child will have gone through an incredible amount of effort and energy to be able to get to, being able to roll over, being able to push themselves up, being able to crawl. All of these sort of progressive steps of movement take so much effort and energy that you really want to allow them to take advantage of that and to freely use those new skills as they come about. And that sort of mastery over their own sleep cycle as well, their activity cycle, that sort of balance there for them, is having them on a floor bed where they can then, when they're ready, independently get up, explore the room. You make sure that the room's safe. They can get up, they can explore the room, they can go back to the bed area.
It's really lovely to see the floor bed coming up on social media posts and in different aspects of our life now outside of the Montessori community. So it's becoming less taboo for a child to sleep on a floor bed. It's really easy to do. It's child friendly. I would even argue that it saves space here in Hong Kong because you don't need a crib, another furniture piece. You can do it from birth.
Right. Yes, yeah. We'll leave it there now in terms of talking about the floor bed and move on to our next topic. But of course, if you have further questions, you're welcome to ask questions and bring them forward for us. Okay, so let's move on to the next topic, which is how do parents make the most out of meal times? Okay, so this is generally 3 times a day or whatever it is for your family. And there's a lot of aspects that go into mealtime nutrition, eating, independence, power struggles perhaps, family time. There's a lot of elements there. So let's talk a little bit about making the most of meal times.
So we can start with a little weaning table. I think we have a visual we can show you. Right around 6 months when you're introducing solids to your child, you want to help the child become as independent as possible at that young age in their eating habits. And you want to give them this message that you can pull out a little chair and you can seat yourself, and you can also leave the table when you feel full. That's really important, Matthew, what you said about healthy eating habits, to encourage the child to be self-aware, follow their own cues for hunger. And it's the same thing with sleep. Your child can crawl into bed when they're tired and out of bed when they feel alert. But empowering them to do that and setting up the environment so that they can do so is really important in Montessori.
Yeah. And we'll talk about this a little bit further when we get into toilet learning as well. But your child is physically experiencing all of these things themselves, right? And they're very sensitive to the sensations that that they're experiencing, that they're feeling, and it's about creating a place where they can respond to that. So as they get a little bit older and they're beginning to choose quantities of food and so forth, if you keep rigid control over all of that all the way through, then they're not sort of developing that natural natural growth and progression. Okay, so
on that note, you were talking about family meals, so I just want to jump in and say we also do use a high chair. So we have another visual. So the weaning table you can use for snack or meal times where other adults cannot eat with the child, but it's still so important that we model to our children what is expected of them. And we're going to talk more about this with toilet learning, but modeling how we use utensils, how we chew with our lips closed, how we converse over a meal. The social meaning of having a meal is really important. And so we try as much as possible to include a child in a family meal when it's possible in the home. And we could have a setup like this one where the child can climb up on their own. And some of the children can do this even before they can walk. A lot of us have high chairs that you need to lift the child and place them into, so they're not actively choosing when to get up on that chair. But an 11-month-old can climb into the chair. They may need help turning. This type of high chair is really great because it pulls right up to the table. Their child is not distanced by a tray.
But they're able to get up.
And they can pick and choose food at the table. So we also encourage families not to plate all of the child's food, set them up for success so that they always have this impression that they can take more food, but that they don't have to finish everything on their plate. They make that choice for themselves.
And a lot of that is really, it's explaining and it's modeling to the child of so you can even talk through if you're sort of taking first of, how much do I feel? I think I'm going to start with one scoop, and you can verbalize it. And I think that might be, I'll get more later.
Yes.
Right? And then you
then
you offer to the child and allow them to go through the same sort of process. And if that, so it's about slowing all of that down. All of this it's still all new for your child as they're going through this. So, and as adults, we forget that there's been a process of learning that. So it's allowing them to go through that. If we can just take a look at the table setting as well. So we have a picture of the table setting. So children can, at quite an early age, begin to set the table for themselves, set the table for their family members. And you sort of want to have all the sort of components there that they need. And both from a grace and courtesy perspective, but then also in terms of proper utensil use and so forth.
So we look at mealtime not just as the act of feeding the child, it's a whole process, like with everything in Montessori. How we set up the materials and how we tidy up is a big part of that. And it helps the young child's concentration to develop because they're so fascinated by the way we eat. We do it so many times a day. They want to be just like us. So we can set up a small area in the kitchen, either a low drawer or shelf. I actually have a photo of a trolley that I'm using because I don't have the space in my kitchen. So it's just a repurposed trolley that the child can access a little dish for themselves, their own cutlery, their glass, and carry it to and from the table. A wonderful movement exercise, actually.
If you have low shelves or low drawers, you could also repurpose those, instead of using the trolley, but certainly you can have that trolley on the side. And if you sort of, we think of, well, it's just setting the table, what's the big deal? But really, there's so much in terms of working memory, there's so much in terms of language, there's so much in terms of sequence, all of these cognitive skills that they need for later learning. Can really be infused within this mealtime process.
If you have a young child like I do who loves to run, asking them to carry a jug of milk to the table is so wonderful, and they do it so carefully because they know they've been given this precious item, and they know if they spill, they have to get the tools to tidy that up. So it's a very natural way to challenge the child's control.
Yeah, and challenging their strength and their coordination and all of those skills, and do remember that there's a lot of value in that. The spilled milk is not nearly as important as the opportunity they had to try to manage it and get it over to the table or what have you.
It's problem solving. It's problem solving. We talk about the importance of that when we're referring to building resilience, but being able to spill milk and then fix that spill, have tools accessible. So part of the meal setting is to also have tools ready for sweeping and
Child-sized.
real
and it has to be realistic. It has to be
materials.
child size, real materials, things that are breakable, things that give real feedback to the child. We tend to avoid plastics as much as we can, so it's something that gives it a real tangible feedback as well. Okay, let's move on.
I have a question.
Okay, we have a question coming in that we're going to address.
From Alan. How do I deal with my picky eater?
Okay, so Alan wants to know, before we move on to toilet learning, because we are getting a little bit later in our session, but one more question related to meal times, and it's about the food itself. So we talked a little bit about the logistics. So Alan is asking about picky eaters.
Yes.
And that's certainly a fairly common issue.
Yes. Hi, Alan. So picky eaters, I think you need to remember that eating anything aside from milk at this point is new, and it's new flavor, new sensory experience through the taste and the textures and the visual sense. If they don't like it the first time, it doesn't mean that they don't like it and they won't like it later on. I think children have to try 5 to 10 times before they can accept a new taste into their palate.
Or a new texture. And
right.
Children can be very sensitive to different qualities. It might be texture, it might even be color,
smell.
It might be the temperature of a particular food or different types of food. So it's about, and it does have to be reintroduced.
Yes, several times. Yeah, at least 5 to 10 times before they accept it. And I don't know how old Alan's child is, but you want to try exposing the child to as many different textures, crunchy, slippery, sticky, that tackiness, as young as possible, so that they begin to experience that.
And a big element for here as parents is to try not to pass on our own prejudices and our own likes and dislikes for particular foods, because maybe broccoli is your least favorite food, but it would be great if your child could eat broccoli. But if they're always hearing or knowing that you sort of avoid it or what have you, and conversely, if it's always sort of laid out that the sweet thing is the treat, if you finish that, then you can have this. So even before a child may have developed that particular preference, or maybe they do, then you're already sort of pre-framing it for them that that's what they should like, that's what they shouldn't like. And sometimes that comes in very subtly for us. So just be really really conscious of being neutral about that. And so if they say once, oh, I don't like this, don't repeat it next time, oh, I know you don't like that, or that's the thing you don't like. Because that's the one time, that's the first time they tried it, or maybe they've only tried it a few times. Just let that lie and let them go forward after that.
So just like a follow-up.
We have a follow-up question as well.
From MCU.
Okay, from MCU, yes.
Yeah. My child now is 2.5. Sometimes she just refuses to eat because she got used to pasta. Any trick?
So child refusing to eat because just used to pasta. So
I love pasta.
Pasta all the time. Yes. I'm also not the one to ask about that because I do eat a lot of pasta as well. So there's a few sort of different ways to go with that. So one is you could introduce different foods with the pasta, so you can mix different things in. That's one sort of avenue you can go down to get more variety in the diet, and then it can sort of change where it becomes a pasta salad with less and less pasta in it, or what have you, or if it's a hot pasta dish, more and more sauce and less pasta, whatever. But the pasta's still there. But then also, it is about this sort of framework of. And sometimes it's helpful if you have a family eating together, then this is what we have for dinner.
Yes.
This is what we have now, or this is what we have at this mealtime. This is what we're all eating. And your child may very well be stuck and have figured out that I can probably get past if I keep pushing for it. But if you stay pretty firm on it, they might skip a meal.
Right.
They're going to be okay. When they're hungry, they're going to come back and eat something else that's offered. But you can just sort of be pretty solid of, oh, this is what we made today. This is what's on the menu today.
Yes.
And so it's a bit of a push and pull there, in terms of how firm, and you don't want to get really full on power struggle with them. But
I think you really nailed it when you said variety is very important. So don't make pasta the only choice for dinner. And with a 2.5-year-old, there's a lot of learning that's happening about choices. So I like to encourage a choice of protein, a choice of vegetable, a choice of not just the carbohydrates, but to start talking to the young child about the language and about healthy nutrition, what we need in our bodies.
And you can also talk some about planning a meal, like the meal of what we're
Do it
going to have,
together, yeah.
and letting them have choices. Pasta is not one of the choices. So tonight we want to have rice and this, or we want to have this and this. Which of these would you?
Yeah, choice
know?
really helps with a toddler at that age.
And you might not get any success, and it's just pasta, pasta, pasta. But
Still
but
offer.
try some of that,
Yeah, don't give up.
and then you just say, well, okay, if you're not sure, I'm gonna go with this, and this is what we're going to have. So hopefully that helps a little bit. Try a few of those approaches.
She re-answered, as she said. Apparently, she's interested on our plates rather than hers.
Oh, so hopefully you're all eating the same meal by now.
Right.
At 2.5, hopefully you're sharing the same meal. And this is where you can introduce a lot of variety. So don't just stick to one cuisine. Be creative and try different things as a family, because whatever you're eating is always more interesting than what they have on
It's
their
like somebody
plate.
else's bag of chips always look better than your own.
Yeah, always, always.
But yeah.
Sure.
Okay.
And there's another question from Olivia.
Okay. Hi, Olivia.
It says, hello, you mentioned that the child doesn't have to finish their meal. Thoughts on eating their leftovers for afternoon snack? Or just let them skip the meal entirely?
Yes, so we spoke about allowing the child to get up and down from the high chair when they're finished their meal, and to respect that. So no running around the room with the rest of the plate of the food. When they feel full and they've expressed that, and so a young toddler can tell you like this, an older toddler can sign or use the words "I'm full" when they leave the table, and then the meal is done. So with my son, he's 2.5, and I always say, "You're sure? The meal is done. The next meal is at such and such time," I tell him. I think it's a great idea to save the leftover for if the child is hungry later on. That way, they're not being tempted by, often our snacks are high sugar, or they're the nice to have things. So if they've not finished their meal, yes, absolutely. If they are hungry in an hour, my son often, if he doesn't particularly like the food that we're serving that night, he won't eat a lot of it. But his bedtime snack is whatever we had for dinner.
And so there's a few elements that I'd like to touch on here that I think are important to sort of pitfalls that we fall into. One is chasing children with food, feeding the child.
Yes.
From the youngest age. As soon as they're solids, they might be very messy with it, but they can be using their hands, and they should be encouraged to do that from the earliest age. So we should not be in any way feeding them.
Yes.
They feed themselves.
As much as possible.
You know, we show them how to do that, and the meal doesn't become a progressive meal if it starts at the table and then they go to the couch, and so we follow them to the couch with food, and then no, you eat in this particular place. That's where it is. And if you are packing things up for a later snack, or if you have the leftovers, then ideally you involve them in that process too, or they're responsible for that process. In the same way that they might be responsible to take their dirty dishes and put them in the sink, they might be responsible to taking it and doing however much of the packing up and putting in the fridge for a later snack, or putting if you have a cover that you can sort of just put over it, leave it on the counter, whatever you want to do in your home, that they're part of that process too. At the same time, you're modeling the taking as much as you feel like you're going to
You're
need.
satiated.
And you're not trying to get into well, I always just put as much on the plate as I visually want, and then I always have leftovers. You want it to be more of the exception than the rule, but that's a way to handle it when that exception falls. So it is about, let's start with this and you do it yourself. Let's start with this. I'm going to start with this much. Oh, I want some more. Now I can take some more.
That's right. And you mentioned using the hands. So if you take a look at the photo of the high chair with the red chair, we purposely don't plate the food on the child's dish so that the child is forced to use their hands, use certain tools on the table, child-sized tongs or a serving spoon, and that way they also have a little more control of how much they want to eat, and they have to start thinking about that rather than have you decide for them.
Okay, so let's move on to our to the third topic we wanted to cover today, which is about toilet learning. So there's actually a lot of elements to this, a lot of pieces to this. So how do we promote positive toilet learning, Jen, if you can talk to us about that?
we always talk about setting up the environment beforehand. So we have a simple Montessori setup, which includes a little potty chair down on the ground so that the child can access the toilet when they need to. Again, that's about self-awareness, that, oh, my bladder is full, I need to go to here. And there's a little chair that we have, a child-sized place, where they can sit to put on their clothes. I don't know about you, but I find it difficult to put on balance on one foot. And when you're learning to walk and get stable on your feet, you want to have a place where you can sit to pull up and down your underwear. And then a place for soiled underwear.
Yep.
And then dry underwear is accessible as well. Yeah. I just want to mention, you called it toilet learning. And in mainstream society, we call it toilet training. And the reason why we call it toilet learning is because we're trying to help the child to follow their own signals and to become independent in their self-care. That's why we're talking about all these things today. It's because an independent child who can care for themselves is really ready to become an independent learner in an educational setting.
And it comes back again to the sensorial experience. I mean, that's sort of what you focus on. You feel wet or you feel dry.
Yeah, the language.
You know, as opposed to saying dirty or,
Yes.
or any sort of that. It's obviously a natural process. It's something, you're a human being. This is something that you learn to develop skills to cope with and manage with. But it's for a child, it's about them feeling for themselves.
Yes.
When they need to go to the washroom, if they've already wet themselves, and do they need a change.
We're definitely going to talk more about judgmental language next time in our series.
Right.
But for toilet learning specifically, yes, we use wet and dry. And we also make a change very early in the child's life. So I think typically for most families, they're not thinking about toilet training until 2.5, 3, when it's required by the schools usually. But it's actually possible to empower a child who's walking. They're physically already ready to start trying to control their muscles for holding and using their bladder. So actually, we make a shift. As soon as they're 7 to 9 months, when they're pulling up to stand, we move the diaper changing into our bathroom. And we change to a standing diaper change. And if any of you have a 6 or 7 month old out there, you know that diaper changing flat on the back is a nightmare for a child who has already turned and learned to crawl. And so the environment has to change. That's what we say in Montessori, is when you're...
And so that's really the trigger there, when
Yes.
they've independently able to flip over
And
and begin crawling and stand up.
Pulling
They're
up.
not necessarily walking, but they're
Yes,
standing up.
pulling up to stand.
At that point, I know I can move from that table change to
into the bathroom.
into
And
the
then
bathroom
they
for
can
full
level
setting.
themselves either on the adult's leg or on the bathtub or a clean toilet to do a standing diaper change. And that way they're becoming more active in their own self-care. We talk about this a lot, Matthew. Just, can you push down your underwear or your diaper?
Right.
Can you help to get the nappy cream? Can you get the dry diaper?
They do as much of it as they can.
Yeah,
So whatever
supporting
part
that.
they can do in terms of
Yeah.
getting things off, getting things on, picking out
Yes.
the next item, putting the soiled ones away.
Really what you're doing, you're setting the stage for toilet learning, which can happen for most children. If you're looking for the signals, you can start thinking about it anywhere between 12 and 24 months.
So MC has another question.
Yeah, we have another question.
Yeah.
Does the setting necessarily need to be in the bathroom, in the washroom, or in the room is also okay?
Yeah, thank you. I didn't catch the
MC.
name. MC, thanks
Yeah.
MC. The space is really challenging here in Hong Kong. The photo that I show is actually in a different room just because I cannot get into my toilet and take a wide angle photo of the toilet setup. So ideally you do it in some sort of bathroom because you want the child to associate that function of
So
their
they make
body
that connection for the next
with
step.
that room.
Yeah.
That's right. And also it makes it possible for you to model going to the toilet, which is very important as well. You need to show your child, just like eating and drinking, it's a very normal and frequent part of our day, and this is how we do it, and this is where we do it. So it's easier if you're actually in the bathroom.
If you're really confined by space and there's just no physical place to put another, then
I would say hallway is probably better than the bedroom, because the bedroom is an area for resting. You want to maintain that concept.
so somewhere near the bathroom,
Near.
if possible.
Yeah. Near.
So you might have to make some judgments there depending on your
Do
physical
you want
space.
another question, or you want to continue?
We can take another question on
Okay, so
toilet learning.
Jean Wong
Hygiene.
Son just turned 3. He wouldn't go to the potty until he's desperate.
Right.
He'd rather not drink anything. And he tries at all means not to poo in the potty. And he actually wants to save it for the nappy during his sleep.
Right.
He doesn't want to do the toilet either. How to encourage him.
Right. So this is a 3-year-old boy who is really just sort of avoiding using the toilet and sort of holding, not taking in extra liquids because not wanting to go to the bathroom.
Poor guy.
Holding until nap time and when he's wearing a diaper perhaps and to go have a bowel movement there rather than do it in the toilet. So thoughts on that?
So typically we would make sure you have the setup there. A lot of families choose to use the main toilet. It's a space saver, I think, but it can be a little daunting when you're that young to have to climb up and then turn around to urinate or have a bowel movement. So try to get a low space that, like we have in the picture. And then you have to watch your child, observe carefully, but if you know your child best, if it's every 50 minutes or to an hour that your child needs to go and urinate, then at 45 minutes, you're going to be asking your child, oh, do you need to use the toilet? At the beginning, if you haven't started any toilet training, then it's going to be, it's time to use the toilet. So the language really matters. We'll be talking about that in our language seminar, but the language you use is so important. So
Right.
Do you need to go to the toilet? If your child is always going to say no, and you know that at 55 minutes they'll be wetting themselves, then the language you're using is, it's time to use the toilet, and then you're gently herding them there.
You're also, I mean, at that age, 3 years of age, so you're maybe trying to peel back the layers of the onion a bit about what's going on there. You know, maybe there's a bit of a, is it something in the control area? It might be something physically about the bathroom and the bathroom space. Sometimes there's little hookups that a child has about something, and they might have difficulty verbalizing it or really being conscious of what it is. But it's the toilet seat's always too cold, and I really don't like that feeling. Or I mean, it could be some little stone in the shoe that's blocking them from doing that. It could be a larger sort of control sort of framework of, and so. You want to try to tease that out a little bit if you can and figure out what that is. And basically you just keep trying different strategies as well.
Yeah.
Different language strategies, different modeling strategies, sort of a preventative, proactive, oh, it's time now, let's, So it can be complicated. It can take a bit of persistence to figure out what the barrier is there.
So much consistency.
You might, if there isn't another sibling, but maybe there's another friend who's of a similar age, or maybe there's something some other sort of form of modeling that can be done where they can see that, oh, it's a natural, it's a comfortable thing that can happen.
Yes. My first thought, Jean, was if your child is using this as a form of control, then look at other areas in life. Is the 3-year-old getting enough choice in other areas? So as much as possible, you want to allow him to choose, whether it's carrots or peas tonight, or the red socks or the blue socks, or to play in the playground or to play in the garden. Try to give your child as many opportunities to choose, because they really need that between 2 and 3. That development of will is happening.
And maybe try to give some choice even in that process. Which color of hand towel would you like to use to dry your hands after, or like anything you can do to add in some elements of choice there.
But at that stage also just being very neutral, as Matthew said, with the language. So even though they're wetting themselves, it's very matter of fact, non-judgmental, and not shaming. You're wet, let's go get you dry. Where do we go to get dry? Very calm and consistent about that.
And a big thing about that is, and in any of these kind of situations, when you get to a point where you're really starting to think this is a problem, or this is something that I need to do something about, then we're going to have the tendency to be bringing that emotion to the situation with our child. It may be reflecting and sort of leaking into our language, and that's going to tend not to get us headed in the right direction. So try to acknowledge that, be with that, think it through away from the situation. So then when you're ready to address it, you can come in pretty deadpan, pretty neutral on it.
Yes.
And
Take the emotional component
the
out.
component out, so that it's, because maybe it's just an emotional power struggle thing, and it's nothing to do with the actual act.
So Sincere asks, would setting a timer for going to the potty work too?
Hi, Sincere. I think Sincere watched our first
Yes.
series as well.
Yes. So Sincere is asking about setting a timer for going to the washroom to sort of help the awareness of when is the time.
I
supposed
did.
to be.
I for my child, I needed that every 45 minutes.
Was that for you or was that for your child?
It was for me. Yeah, it was for me because I knew that he would be wet. What you don't want to do is become dependent on the timer. So you don't want the child to hear the timer and think, oh, I need to go to the bathroom now. You want the child to actually think about, is my bladder full? So the language around that. So I set a silent timer on my phone.
Right, just for you to remind yourself that now I should remind my child.
Yeah.
As opposed to,
Ding.
so a timer there, because then the child, they're going to be relying on their senses, but they're going to rely on their sense of the timer rather than their sense of
that sensation.
That sensation of I'm feeling full, and I'm feeling like I need to go to the washroom.
And
so,
on that note, so when I say every 45 minutes, I really mean every 45 minutes. I don't mean potty training this afternoon and then maybe in a few days we'll try it again. That consistency really matters. So right now is the best time to hang out in your underwear if you've got a child under the age of 3 and tackle this toilet learning. When else are you ever going to be tied down and at home and not rushing off to a play date or school or an extracurricular activity, so that you can give your child that consistency. Go without the pants in the underwear for 2 weeks, give it, where you can do that every 45 minutes, where it's more challenging if you're in a public space, you're trying to find a toilet that's relatively sanitary. Doesn't always happen.
Yeah. We have another question.
From Kevin Hung.
Okay, from Kevin. Hi, Kevin.
So it says, would there be any advice for a child, a girl, who insists on standing up when she toilets apart from a cold seat? It is a new problem, as she was previously receptive to going in the potty.
Anything about age there? Any indication of the age of the child? So the question is, so this is for a young girl who was successfusly using the toilet.
So she can do it.
Can do it, but is now decided that she wants to stand up.
That's okay.
While she's using
That's
the
okay.
toilet. I guess as long as it's successful and it's
as long as it's going into the
going
bowl. Yes. It could be a control thing again here.
Yeah. So he said other than the possibility of the cold seat, which is a possibility too, I guess. Could it could be control. Sometimes it's very hard to know what's going on in the mind of a child in terms of why they make a particular choice. For the most part, in that kind of scenario, as Jen says, as long as there's no real damage being done, meaning it's not going into the body.
Okay.
So that's why the challenge is more crucial, because it's not being successful.
So I have a son who sits to pee. We started like that to urinate, and he also knows how to stand. But because of the physical challenges, sometimes the urine goes on the floor. So we have a splash mat under the little potty, and then we have tools nearby to clean up afterwards, and those are child-friendly tools. So I have a mixture in a little spray bottle, my son loves it, of vinegar and water. He
doesn't pee outside just to use the spray bottle, does he?
Sometimes. And then it's accessible on the shelf at child height.
18 months. Okay, thank you.
Okay, and he will go and get the spray, and there are little claws that he can use. So he is responsible as much as possible for any mess that he makes on the floor. Obviously, this is a little more challenging with the bowel movements, but in our case, it's usually only urine. Kevin, in your case, I would say, can you find a mom possibly, or someone who can model continuing to sit on the toilet? 18 months, there's a lot of language comprehension going there. So she can understand words like women sit to urinate, men can stand, boys can stand, but this is just very matter-of-fact language. This is how we do it. And keep modeling it. Don't make a big deal about it. I would say always encourage her to sit. but don't force it. But then she should be responsible for tidying up that mess. Obviously, you're going to be sanitizing that area
Right.
separately.
By responsible, we mean part of the process,
Yes.
To whatever extent, and even at least staying there. So just so they're seeing what the real consequence is when I don't sit down properly, and not in a judgmental way, not in a this is a punishment kind of
No.
way.
This is what we do.
This is
There's a mess,
the
this
logical
is what we do.
consequence of that action is
Yes.
that now we have to clean it up, and so then that happens. But again, you're not trying to build that into the bathroom routine either. So modeling the right way to do it again
Is important.
it is
Yes.
important. And step by step, don't try not to bring too much added emotion into it. Hope
Yeah.
that it sort of just slides off.
Yes,
as
you could also make a picture story, so you could take photos. It sounds like she's done it, and at an early age, that's great, Kevin. Keep that up. You know she can do it, so maybe take photographs of that process. When my bladder feels full, I go to the bathroom, I push down my underwear, I sit down to pee. You can even include women sit to urinate, men stand, and then have that, and so that you can talk about it like a story at bedtime. And toddlers love those type of stories about things
Right.
that happen in their lives, and if she's actually in the photo, even better.
And sometimes talking about it in a relaxed way, away from the situation,
Teachable moment, yeah.
Is helpful. Any final questions before we wrap up?
We have a lot of funny comments.
We have a
Okay.
lot of funny comments about
A
toilet
lot of funny
learning.
comments, a lot of
Thank
potty
you.
humor apparently.
Keep them coming.
We sort of covered three big challenges today
Yeah,
in terms
very
of meal
quickly.
times. Yeah, very quickly. There's a lot more we could go into about setting good nutrition habits and all those. There's other aspects to all of these topics, but we'll leave it there for now. But so why are these skills so important, and especially right now in our current situation where we're in our home so much and all of that?
I always go back to a young child who cannot care for themselves, and we talked about basic needs, sleeping, eating, and toileting, cannot be expected to verbalize themselves independently, think for themselves independently, express feelings independently. We'll talk more about that next time, but that basic self-care is the foundation to building an independent learner and an independent thinker. And it all starts from that self-awareness.
Yeah, it really comes from a place where you have this young human being who's come into the world. They're very much their own selves, and who they're going to be as they grow up, who they're going to grow into, who knows really what that is. But it's about this is very important to the process of empowering them to make the most out of who they're going to be. And so it's being as independent each step of the way as they can be relative to their age and stage.
Yeah. To be active in that rather than passively having their diaper changed with their legs
Psychologically,
up.
the ownership over that is really
yeah.
important. The ownership over that's really important.
Self-feeding.
And so these aren't just sort of menial things that are asides. These are
Really
these are
important.
tasks and accomplishments really, and very important aspects to childhood development.
So we have two extra questions.
Great.
Okay.
Yeah, we can take more.
Two more questions before.
Okay, so we have one from Julie,
Hi, Julie.
and she's asking, my son uses the potty before mealtime, but there are many times he needs to go during the meal.
Mhm.
Do I keep letting him do this, or do I ask him to wait? And he's 3 already. He's in our casa.
Okay, so
An IMS parent. Hello,
a
Julie.
3-year-old that goes to the bathroom before mealtime, but then during mealtime frequently needs to go again, or regularly asks to go again and asks to leave. And so the question is to allow that, or to discourage it, or how to manage that. I guess one question first to try to assess is he actually going and is he actually using the bathroom during the mealtime? So is he actually peeing or having a bowel move,
party.
right? Having a bowel move beforehand, and then is he actually again during the meal?
During the meal.
So
Or is it a
if he
distraction?
actually is, then you're probably going to be fine with it, and you're just going to set up what's the routine for that in terms of you get down, you tuck in your chair, you make sure you wash your hands, you come back, you join the meal.
Right.
if it's something else, if it's a way to avoid the mealtime, if it's a way to go off and have a bit of a party, as you
There's
say,
no pasta.
or they're not really using, he's not really using the bathroom beforehand, then you're going to put different limits or different framework around it.
I would say look at how often he needs to go regularly.
Right,
when
at
it's
other
not
times.
mealtime during a morning cycle, how often it is. Maybe you ask your teacher about that at school, how often does he need to go, and then try to say within that framework. So if it's my child goes frequently every half an hour, then if he's gone before mealtime, then you should know within 15 minutes he doesn't really need to
And
go.
is it more of a bowel movement? Is it urinating? Sometimes when we take food in, if you take some solids in, then it can trigger a bowel movement. If you take liquid in, it can trigger a feel that you need to urinate that maybe you didn't have before. People have different sensitivities that way.
Yes.
There's a possibility that one of those is.
But I do
is
agree,
maybe playing.
if he's going because he really needs to go,
If he's actually using the toilet, then
that's
then
okay. That's
think
pretty good self-awareness.
Yeah, I'd let that continue on. So just try to do a bit of digging there to figure
it's
out
not
what's
a
really
distraction
going on.
tactic.
And if it is a distraction, then I would move towards trying to set a bit of a limit
Yes,
around it.
and that's language.
And it's not an excessive limit, but it's we're right in the middle.
Firm but gentle.
Another 10 minutes and we'll be finished our meal, and then you can go at the end of the end of the meal.
We have two final questions. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. So one from Mabel Ho,
Hello, Mabel.
and this one says, "My son is 2.5. He can stand to pee every time, but he struggles hard every time going into the bathroom. He wants to run away. How to deal with that?"
Yeah, I've been there.
So Mabel has a two and a half year old, is that right? Who he's fine actually using the toilet, but really tries not to even go into the bathroom. So we'll run away.
Herding cattle.
Yeah. So what's
Firm
your-
but gentle. And firm but gentle. So with every child, it's going to be different. But if you already know your child can do it, like he's already done it, check, then I think you can be consistent about language and then give an invitation verbally. And then if it's the second time, then it needs to be a gentle physical movement. Yeah.
Yeah, and you can see,
If
is there the possibility of building some ownership into it, like having him close the door after going in type of scenario, or something that where, but there's some participation, ownership over the process kind of thing.
I've found with Benji that if you do stick to it every day for 2 weeks, and now is a good time to do that, it will really help resolve those issues. So I can say for a fact that now with being at home, not going out as much, we've really mastered that because we've had no other options. You're going to the toilet now.
And I know we've said this several times before, but you want to make sure that there isn't an emotional payoff for him doing that. Meaning,
Rewards.
when he runs away, that always gets mom or dad's attention, and then they're invested. This is a way of getting them to invest in me emotionally.
Yes.
Because sometimes there's some behaviors like that has nothing to do with the behavior. It's just about, I found that I can trigger mom or dad when I do this.
Yes.
And so if you're flat emotionally,
Yes.
and just consistent, then
It's
you
time.
take that sort of reward, so to speak, of
Away.
attention away,
Yeah.
and perhaps sort of it just sort of dies out the desire for that behavior. But
Or you could go the other way, where do you need to go to the toilet, and your son may say, no, Benji likes to say, my bladder's empty. And then check in again in 5 minutes. Or maybe with a 2.5-year-old, even give the option. Would you like to go now? And if they say no, they don't want to, then would you like to go now or in 5 minutes?
Right.
But sometimes just having that choice will make a difference, and they'll go on their own if they have that option.
Okay, so the last question is, I noticed my girl, it's from MC again.
Okay.
I noticed my girl refuses to voice out she needs to go to the bathroom at school, maybe out of shyness. Any tricks? Especially she will move to Casa very soon, and I know toilet learning is one of the criteria for going to
Okay.
Right.
So, and I'm as parent. Hello,
Right. So,
MC.
Yeah. So this is for a child that's going to be coming into our IMS Casta Bambini program for 3 to 6 year olds. Now, when they come into a Casta, and so the question from MC is, perhaps in the foundation group or in the program they're currently in, they don't verbalize at all that they need to go to the bathroom. What's going to happen when they get into this mixed age 3 to 6 year old classroom? So one element about that is the classrooms in our program, they'll have a standard protocol for what happens when you go to the bathroom. And actually, it's not about voicing it out. It's simply about, there's usually a bathroom necklace or bathroom pass.
Routine.
And then so it's the child can just
Choose to go.
and choose to go and doesn't necessarily have to announce or verbalize out. So it shouldn't be so much of an issue. But
Meaning she doesn't need to tell the teacher.
Right.
She can actively choose to go to the toilet and go.
But at the same time, you are wanting to build up the capacity and confidence to tell an adult in whatever setting, classroom setting or whatever setting, that I need to go to the bathroom now, right? So you are wanting to build up. So that's about, you could do through a bit of role playing, what we call a grace and courtesy kind of lesson. It could be a bit of a role playing. Let's pretend that you need to. How do you say that to someone? Maybe role play with someone that they're familiar with, but it's not part of the nuclear family. It's an aunt or
cousin.
it's a cousin or something. So they start to branch out in the confidence a little bit. And again, it can be a role play rather than a real need situation. Just to get into that, break down some of those possible mental barriers of communicating and verbalizing that. So in some familiar but slightly more challenging settings, and sort of build that up.
I think
Other
with
thoughts?
a young 2-year-old, you want to also just make sure that you've given the specifics of the language, because I know you know what to say when you need to go, but does your child know? So spell it out explicitly. When your bladder feels full or when you feel you need to urinate, you can say and have that language there and be consistent with that. Practice at home.
And it's actually something that you could model at home too. So,
Yes,
so you're at home, you're in the living room, you're doing something. You can
I don't
actually
feel comfortable.
you can actually
I think I need to use
say
the
that.
bathroom.
Oh, I think just so it becomes a very matter-of-fact thing, that this is what we
Modeling is
what we
so
can
important.
do, or the way that we can respond. So I hope that's helpful. You will be able to, your teachers will be able to support that process too, and make sure that that's happening when children first adjust into a new classroom.
That's the first one of the first
IMS.
lessons.
Yeah, and we do also, watch out for the young ones and tend to proactively take them in groups to the washroom, or take them so that they're, because they will forget about it. There's so much going on in the class when they first come in, and everything's sort of new. So there's a whole process that we go through to help that adaptation. So not to worry very much about that, but you do want to, at the same time, build up the skill just more generally speaking. Okay, so that's it for us for today. We will touch a couple of resources that parents can go to if they want more on these topics.
So right now, the North American Montessori Teachers Association is offering the resource Edison's Day. It's about a 30-minute short documentary about a Montessori toddler who's 20 months. And it just follows him throughout his day, and you can get lots of good ideas. I mean, we talk about a lot about how to do things, but just to see it and see how a parent would do it is really nice.
And we're going to post a link.
It's free right now until the end of the month, so you have a week or so.
Manta.org?
We'll post a link, and there's a free code. I think it's free April that we'll include with that, but I highly recommend that.
It's not like a brand new video. It's something that was done some years ago, but all of the information is completely relevant and sort of shows it there. Anything else to point parents to? Well, I was referring earlier, especially getting a younger child, Dr. Montanero's book, Understanding the Human Being.
If you could only read one book, if you're expecting a child. We read this book in our training. I went back to it when I was pregnant, and then I went back to it again when Benji was about 6 months and starting to get mobile and more interested in the world.
It's prenatal into the first year.
First year, yes.
More or less. Yeah.
Understanding the Human Being. It's a short book, easy to read, but
pretty practical.
Yes, she was a doctor as well, like Dr. Montessori.
Yep. Okay, and so if you have time, please do join us again on
May
May 14th at 1 p.m. We'll be talking about language and emotional development. Watch out for that, and if not, then just come back to the Facebook page and do a replay later on.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us.
Bye.
Bye.